What's going on, and welcome to Joe's Geek Show, the video series where we talk comics and sometimes movies, which is definitely the case here. And so, coming from the minds of Shinji Higuchi and Hideki Anno, the peeps that brought us the ever so incredible Shin Godzilla, returned to the, I guess you could call it the Shinverse, for Shin Ultraman, a modern interpretation of a classic character. And after I got out of the movie, I even picked up this handy dandy book about all of the VFX for the characters in this movie, and let me tell you, there's definitely some good stuff in here. But enough about that, let's talk about the story. Well, this is Shin Ultraman, aka Ultraman, which means it's a movie about a guy who fights kaiju. And this movie essentially begins via the credits of telling us what life was like before Ultraman even showed up, and that kaiju were becoming more prevalent. The military was able to deal with them to a degree, but then there was the rise of what was known as the S-class kaiju, in which case the Japanese government was like, yeah, we kind of need a team to deal with this sort of thing because it's becoming a lot more to manage. And so the S-Class Species Suppression Protocol, or SSSP, was created to deal with these threats. And it's during one of these attacks that a light falls down from the sky, and thus we are introduced to Ultraman. And I can definitely say from the jump, this is a movie that was clearly made by superfans. From the intro that mirrors the opening to the original series, to the music, to the sound design. When Ultraman jumps up and flies through the air, when he does his punch-up effect when he transforms. Even his Specium Ray looks how it did in that show from the Showa era. And I will say, the first, about 20 minutes or so of this movie, just a big smile on my face. I was shoving popcorn down my esophagus and I was like, yep, all right, there's what I want. But then the rest of the movie happens. And in that, it was a lot to digest because this movie is very, I don't know if experimental is the right word, because unlike, say Shin Godzilla or really almost any movie for that instance, this film does not follow a typical 3-act film structure, nor is there really a singular narrative. Instead, this movie's comprised of 4 short stories, or, as a better analogy, 4 episodes of a TV show that got mashed together into a movie. And not even really 4 related episodes of a show, like say a 4-parter that got squished into a movie, but more so 4 episodes from like different points in a season, which does make the movie a bit janky to watch at times because there really isn't much transition between these stories, which I do think is kind of a shame because each of these stories had a potential to be its own movie. Because first there's the Ultraman appearance and there's this mystery about who or what is Ultraman, so there could have been this really interesting mystery aspect to the film. The second story is about the appearance of an alien named Zereb, whose sole focus is to show Ultraman that, why are you protecting humanity? They could just totally turn on you at the drop of a hat. The third story is about the character of Mephiles, whose whole thing is about showing the trusting nature of humanity and then taking advantage of it. And the fourth and final story has to do with another Ultra by the name of Zophie, who unleashes this giant robot named Zeton over the Earth, which is just transforming and is, after some point, going to, blow up the planet. Which again, individually, each of these sound like really interesting stories, but because it's just always constantly changing every 20 minutes, it's just a little hard to get invested. And I also think from a character standpoint, we end up spending maybe a little bit more time with some of these villains than we actually do with Ultraman himself. And speaking of characters, there's also those that comprise the SSSP, which I think these characters are interesting. They definitely all got, their quirks and such, particularly the character Asami, played by Masami Nagasawa, who grabs hers and sometimes other people's rear ends and sort of a, good luck thing, I guess, before they go off on a mission. And I'll say every time it happened, I chuckled. Not a full-on laugh, but, just kind of a little bit of a chuckle. And unlike Ultraman, we do get more time with these characters, but I also feel like we don't get to know them enough to, really care about them. However, there are still some interesting aspects about this movie, particularly, you got some instances like the way humanity is characterized. Because what we end up seeing is the evolution of how people, perceive all of these attacks. Like in the beginning, kaijus are kind of still new, so, a lot of the people are running, they're terrified, by the middle of the movie, they're a little more intrigued, wanting to take pictures and whatnot, and then by the end, they're just totally apathetic to everything. It's like, oh hey, giant robot in the sky that's probably gonna blow up the planet. Anyway, how about them Steelers? There's also a bit of a thing going on with the Japanese government where it's sort of like, an alien comes down, talks to them, hey, I come in peace sort of deal. And then the alien ends up betraying their trust, and, no matter how many times this happens, the Japanese government's still like, hey, welcome to Earth. And there also seem to be questions surrounding Ultraman, specifically why he wants to protect humanity. Especially as we come to understand this huge plot detail that we find out, a little bit more towards the middle of the movie. But basically, the main character, Shinji Kaminaga, who we think to be Ultraman through the majority of this movie, turns out to not be Shinji Kaminaga. In fact, he dies during that initial kaiju attack at the beginning of the movie. Or more so, the impact of Ultraman crashing into the Earth, in which, Ultraman just finds the body and I guess absorbs his DNA or so and just makes himself look like Shinji, and yeah, just totally assumes his identity. Because periodically throughout the movie, there's moments where he goes back to that original body and we just see Shinji laying there on the ground, and despite potentially months or so passing by, he's not really decomposing at all. I also don't know how he kept the bugs and the wolves and stuff off of him, but effectively the conversation of what does it mean to be human kind of takes place. And I just wish that Ultraman as Kaminaga had a bit more interaction, with the SSSP, because he does spend a good chunk of the movie away from everybody. When it comes to the sound design, as I said, a lot of it is basically 60s, 70s style. From the music to the monster screeches to the explosions, specifically, in the beginning of this movie, everything sounds very, kind of muffled because of the lower bit rate, which I will say is definitely cool, but it sometimes does create a bit of a disconnection in my brain because I'm listening to effectively these older sound effects and whatnot, but on an HD canvas. But the movie does not always rely on those older themes, because as the film progresses, so does too the music as we move from those older themes to a more modern orchestral film score. It's just the score that's used later in the movie isn't quite as memorable as what came before. And it does kind of make me feel like what they should have done was actually do a modern orchestral version of the show's original score. When it comes to the cinematography in this movie, I think it's good for the most part. My only real complaint is every once in a while, the angles on the film would change where maybe we'd shoot from like, a lower perspective. And it almost looks like it was shot on like an Android or an iPhone, because the picture's good, but it's not as crisp. And even though it was a technique that was used sparingly in the film, whenever it did occur, it did pull me out of the movie. Now, when it comes to the CGI in this movie, it is a bit of a tug of war that's going on, because on one hand, they are going for, that more show-like feel in which the monsters aren't supposed to 100% look real, which means the kaiju in this movie are a bit more animated. They don't look as good as, say, Shin Godzilla did. But for what the movie was going for, I think it works. Shin Ultraman himself, I think, looks really good in this movie. He's very tall, he's slender. Obviously, that color timer was removed because they wanted to present Ultraman in a more faithful way that the original artist designed. And so instead, as he starts to get weaker, the red on his body changes colors. The action, I think, is the overall highlight of the movie, The producers of this film know exactly why I was there, and boy, they gave it to me. That, of course, is Ultraman versus Kaiju action, and let me tell you, the battles in this movie are just fun. And just watching all of these sequences really brings me back to being a kid essentially on Saturday morning. And so at the very heart of it, this is once again a movie made by fans for fans. And because of that, this is something I would recommend to an Ultraman fan, but not so much for the casual moviegoer, as the lack of a singular narrative may deter a person from, really enjoying the experience. And as for me, though I think there are some things to be desired, I still overall enjoyed this movie. It's something I wanted to see, I'm glad I saw it, and I am curious to see what this team is gonna do next with Shin Kamen Rider. So Shin Ultraman, what did you think about this movie if you saw it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave your comments in the comment section below. And if you liked this video, I'd love it if you'd smash that like button, share it with some friends, subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and ring that notification bell for more comic book content. And if you're wondering what to watch next, consider one of these 2 videos. Alright, take care, have a great day, and as always, stay geeky.